Hey everybody, welcome to Chapter 4, Section 3, the Organization of Life. This is where we learn mammals and reptiles and fish, birds, all the different stuff on there. So let's get started with this. The diversity of living things. Most scientists classify organisms into 6 different kingdoms based on the categories. So what I'm going to be using a lot as we talk through this lesson is imagine you have a trading card, like the Pokemon cards or baseball cards or trading cards, okay, whatever it is you like to collect, trading cards. One for every single animal and organism, plant, animal, and bug, every single organism in the entire world, you have a trading card. Okay, it has a picture of it on the front, tells a little bit of it on the back. Okay, but you have a trading card for every single organism on Earth. You're going to need some way to organize that, right? So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to show you how to organize all of that stuff. Okay, so when the scientists are organizing all the different organisms into categories, they divide it into 6 kingdoms. Kingdoms are the second biggest category. I'm going to tell you there's one even bigger than that called domain. But what they do is they take big categories and then smaller and then smaller and then smaller and then smaller categories. All right, it's like a box within a box within a box, and that's the idea we're going to be using, a box within a box within a box. So the biggest box you can put them all in is actually domain, because that's newer than our book. Then beneath that is kingdom. Okay, and then phylum, class, order, family, genus, and then species. Remember what species is. Species is that one type of animal anywhere on the world. Okay, that one type of animal. So species is the smallest and domain is the biggest, but this thing thinks it's kingdom because the book is old, very old. We'll try to get a new book hopefully soon. All right, so most of the scientists are going to classify all the organisms into 6 different kingdoms. So imagine 6 boxes on the table, and from there you have 6 boxes, and you take all of your trading cards and you set them out into those 6 boxes. Okay. The members of the 6 kingdoms get their food in different ways. They're made up of different types of cells, the smallest unit of biological organization. So we have to figure out what makes this trading card go in this box and not go in that box or that box. How do we find the right box? Okay, so the first thing one of the things is how they get their food. One of the things is the different type of cell they have. All right, so when we have the box of all the fungi, this is the 3rd bullet, the animals and the plants and the fungi, all 3 of those boxes, they have a nucleus in them. So we put a bigger box, okay, of everything that has a nucleus. And inside that big box, we have the fungus box, the animal box, and the plant box. All of these things have a nucleus. Okay, so that's one of the biggest things. And then in the other box, so here's a thing here. The cells of bacteria, fungi, and plants all have cell walls. So what if we made a box just for things that had cell walls? Well, then we have to take the fungus out of the one for the nucleus and put it in the one for cell walls. So I'm going to work you through how the scientists go about setting up these different boxes. Okay. And this sheet, you're going to see this table again and again and again because you need to memorize it. Okay, these are the 6 kingdoms. Let me get a pencil running. These are the 6 kingdoms here. All right, and so you're going to need to know what are the kingdoms. You need to know what are their main characteristics. Okay, we're going to go through each one. We'll go through each one individually, and then you're going to need to send me some examples of each one, and we'll talk about them as well. So I'm going to work you through this as we go through our notes, and I'm going to take this table one step at a time, but you are going to have to memorize this table. Okay. All right. Bacteria is our first group. So when we're thinking about all of the different, let me see if that's, when we think about all of the different organisms on Earth, all right, and we're trying to figure out the most basic thing that divides one from another. Okay, the first division of the box, so that once we make this decision, we don't have to keep shuffling boxes. Okay, so the first biggest thing is, do they have a nucleus or don't they have a nucleus? That's the first biggest divider of all the things. Okay, if they don't have a nucleus, okay, they're called prokaryotic. No. No. They have no nucleus. Eukaryotic do. Eukaryotics do have a nucleus. So that's the first divider, okay, whether or not they got a nucleus. Okay, so bacterias are the ones that don't have a nucleus. No nucleus. No prokaryotic. No nucleus, they're called prokaryotic. All right, so these are the bacteria. Within the bacteria, there are two groups. Okay, there's the Archaebacteria and the Eubacteria. You heard me say eukaryotic a minute ago, right? The word EU just means true. All right, so when I say eukaryotic, that means true nucleus. If I say eubacteria, that means true bacteria. See how I can use U twice because it means true? Okay, so the bacteria do not have a nucleus, okay? And there's two boxes over here. There's the Archa, A-R-C-H-E. You heard the archaeologist? You know what an archaeologist is, right? They study old things. Okay, Archaebacteria are old. Not that they're physically old. They can be brand new baby born, but they're bacteria that are like what was on old Earth when the Earth first formed. Okay, that's why they call them Archaebacteria. It's not that they physically are old, all right? They might be just 2 minutes old. They might be just born, but they are like the old Earth, so Archaebacteria. Eubacteria, the true bacteria, those are the ones that are everywhere, okay? They're on your paper, they're on your computer, they're on your hands, they're on your face, they're in your intestines, they are everywhere. Okay, so those are the two types of bacteria, Archa and Eubacteria. All right, so let's see what our notes actually say, make sure I covered everything. So the bacteria are extremely small. They are all single-celled. And they usually have a cell wall, not always, but usually. And they reproduce by fission. That's where they just split. That's how they make a copy of themselves. They copy the DNA and split. But unlike all other organisms, this is why we've got separated them out into this box to begin with, the bacteria lack a nuclei. Y'all know lack means doesn't have, right? All right, so y'all know lack means it doesn't have. So bacteria do not have a nucleus, and so because they are called prokaryotic. The carry part is the word for nucleus. Prokaryotic, before nucleus. Okay, no nucleus. So prokaryotic. And the two main kinds of bacteria are Archaebacteria and Eubacteria. Remember I said the Archa part comes the same thing as archaeologist, meaning old. The Archaebacteria are the ones who are most like they live in conditions of what was like the ancient Earth when the Earth first forms. It's not that they're old, but they are old type of bacteria. And Eubacteria, EU means true. EU means true bacteria. These are the ones that are everywhere. Okay, the most common type of bacteria are the Eubacteria. I just said they're everywhere. And they live in every habitat on Earth, from hot springs to the bodies of animals and people. Now, if we're talking about a hot springs, think about what hot springs are, with the sulfur and the smoke and all of this, the heat, intense heat, crazy intense heat, and the smoke and the sulfur. Which of those two types of bacteria do you think you might find in a hot springs? The Archaebacteria or the Eubacteria? Well, if we're thinking of hot springs with sulfur and smoke and bubbling goo, probably the Archaebacteria, and they do. If we're thinking on your steering wheel when you're driving the car, if mom lets you drive the car, all right, on your steering wheel, that would be the Eubacteria, because the Eubacteria are the ones that cover everything. Okay, it kind of creeps you out to think about it. All right, so here is our divider thing. So the Archaebacteria live in extreme conditions. Okay, either way too salty for everything else, way too hot, or full of methane, no oxygen. Okay, these are the Archaebacteria. These are the old ones. This is what it was like in the ancient Earth. Okay, this is what they like. Because they live in extreme conditions, we sometimes call them extremophiles. Phile means to love. Extremophiles. Okay, so these are the Archaebacteria. They have different chemical composition than the Eubacteria. That's how they got separated out. Now, what's the similar as both? They are both prokaryotic. And we used to put them together in the same kingdom, but we don't anymore. Okay, that's how old my book is. Okay, the old system had a Monera kingdom that put the two kinds of bacteria together, but it's no longer valid. So the two bacteria types are completely separated from one another. Okay, and we have a 3-domain kingdom, which I'm going to show you, 3-domain system. And the Archaebacteria, what's weird is this old type of bacteria is actually closer to us. Now, what put these bacteria in the spot by themselves? These 2 bacteria got separated out from all the other organisms in the world because they don't have a nucleus, right? So where are we? We're over in the group that has a nucleus, right? So if we're thinking about the 2 bacterias, this Archaebacteria is actually closer to us that have a nucleus. They don't have one, but their characteristics are more similar to us than the Eubacteria. The Eubacteria is further separated from us. Okay, but they are the ones that are found everywhere, found in and on us, everywhere, every place that human or any other organism could be. They also help us make food, vitamins, and nutrients because they're in our intestines. They help us with that. But they can also cause diseases. Okay, so you have good bacteria and you have bad bacteria, and you knew that already. There's good ones and there's bad ones. The Archaebacteria don't really affect us too much. They live in these extreme environments. Okay, but both of them are single-celled, and they can both be autotrophic or heterotrophic. Do you remember what that means? Okay, trophic. Do you remember when we learned our food webs and our food pyramids? We called them trophic levels. That's food. That means feeding. Trophic means feeding. So autotroph means they feed themselves. Does that mean they can make themselves a sandwich? That means they do photosynthesis. Heterotrophic means they have to get food from the outside, consumers like us. Okay. Autotroph, those are our plants. Heterotrophs, those are the animals that have to consume. So if we're talking about bacteria now, they're not plants, they're not animals. Okay, but some of the bacteria can do photosynthesis and some cannot. That's what that means right there. All right, so bacteria and the environment. All right, some of these bacteria are going to break down the remains of waste. You know that when something dies and rots, it's the bacteria that help break it down. Okay, and then when they do so, they return the nutrients back to the soil. Other ones, they have a special job with the nutrients, not just breaking down dead stuff, but they're the ones that take nitrogen and phosphorus. You know, you have a water cycle. You know you have a carbon and oxygen cycle, right, that helps us with the plants. Do you know that we also have a nitrogen and a phosphorus cycle? Nitrogen is crazy important, okay, nitrogen, because it helps to make up proteins and DNA. Okay, nitrogen is crazy important. So just like we have a water cycle and we have a carbon cycle, oxygen cycle, carbon, oxygen, we have a nitrogen cycle. So when something dies, we need to get that nitrogen available for the next generation. The air is full of nitrogen, but we can't use it. Okay, we can't use air nitrogen. We have to have physical nitrogen. And so we can get it from something that dies to use for the next generation, but we can't use it from the air. There are bacteria who do that for us. Okay, so some of the bacteria are going to take the nitrogen cycle. Okay, and some of the bacteria are going to do the phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus is another thing important for teeth and bones and a whole bunch of other things that make our muscles move. So some of the bacteria are going to convert nitrogen from the air, like I said, into a form that the plants can use. And once the plants have a hold of it, then everybody else in the food chain can get it too. All right, so this conversion is important again because what I say, nitrogen is crazy important to make DNA and other proteins. So these bacteria that work the nitrogen for us help all of us with our DNA. All right, next, bacteria in the environment. They also help us to digest our food. You've heard of people who are lactose intolerant, and they can take a pill to help them deal with milk and cheese and stuff. That pill is full of a bacteria. Okay, it's called lactobacillus. Okay, it's a bacteria that helps them to digest their milk. And so these bacteria are going to allow many organisms, not just milk though, okay, but milk is the best example. There's bacteria in our gut that help us digest our food. Okay, now some of them though, so E. coli is one of the ones. There's different E. colis. I've always thought of E. coli as a bad one, but this one says it's okay. So there may be more than one kind of E. coli. All right, but it helps us to digest our food and release vitamins inside of our gut. All right, now looking at our, remember I said looking at this picture, when I said we had all of those trading cards, right? This is the whole thing that we're going with. We have all of these trading cards and we need to separate them out on the tables. All right, so we have three domains. Okay, we said kingdom is usually what we would consider the biggest box to put our trading cards in, but there's an even bigger box called domain. All of the Eubacteria, the everywhere bacteria, they go in one domain, and then there's just the one kingdom. Okay, those are easy to sort. Then there's the Archaebacteria, the old ones. All right, and they also only have one kingdom. Okay, but these two are so different from each other that they can't go in the same box. Okay, that's why we have the domains. Now, everybody else over here, do you remember what was the difference in these two? These guys don't have a nucleus, and these guys do have a nucleus. So everybody that has a nucleus is going in this box right here. But that's still a heck of a lot of stuff. So what we're going to do is once we have everything that has a nucleus in this box, then we're going to further break them down into smaller boxes inside. Okay, so we have the Protists, plants, fungi, and animals. So this box has everything that has a nucleus, and then inside that are 4 smaller boxes. See that? And those will be our kingdoms that are inside the eukaryote box. Here's our table again. So we've talked about the Archaebacteria. Those are the old ones. Okay, the ones like old Earth. They are single-celled. They do not have a nucleus. They reproduce by dividing in half. We said that was called fission. And they're found in the harsh environments. We said that we called them extremophiles. So when it says harsh, think extreme. It's hard to write with my mouse. These are the ones found, the extremophiles. Okay, some that live off of methane in the swamps, some that like crazy heat, some that like salt. Okay, now these are the Eubacteria. So these are the Archaebacteria are the old type. The Eubacteria, that EU means true. All right, EU means true. So these are all single-celled. They do not have nuclei. That's how they got to be taken off of this box. Okay, whoops, sorry. Let me undo that. Erase that one. Okay, all right, back to the red pen. All right, so the Eubacteria, they are single-celled. They don't have a nucleus. They also reproduce by fission, and these are the ones that are common everywhere. Okay, Protobacteria in soils and intestines, Cyanobacteria, also called blue-green algae. Okay, so these are some of the more common ones. Now we're about to head over to this group. Every single one of these has a nucleus. All right, so these are all the eukaryotes. Eukaryotes, because they do have a nucleus. You do. Pro, no. So prokaryotes are these guys. Pro, no. No nucleus. You do. All of these other guys do. So let's start with Protists, I think. Nope, fungi starts first. Well, alrighty, fungi starts first. All right, so funguses, they're an organism that has a nuclei. That's how everybody from here on out is going to have a nucleus. Okay, they have rigid cell walls for support. Remember learning about plant cell walls? Funguses also have a cell wall, but they don't have chlorophyll, so they don't do photosynthesis. So now, try to think back of what you learned about plant cells and animal cells. Animal cells don't have a nucleus. I mean, sorry, not nucleus. I'm talking cell wall right now. Sorry, animal cells don't have a cell wall. Plant cells do. Animal cells don't do photosynthesis. Plants do. So think of the two things, cell wall and photosynthesis. Okay, animals don't have a cell wall and they don't do photosynthesis. Plants do have a cell wall and they do photosynthesis. Now let's throw fungus in here. Fungus has a cell wall like plants do, but they are consumers like animals. Okay, so that's why fungus is not a plant. A fungus, a mushroom, is not a plant. Okay, they do have cell walls like plants do, but they don't have photosynthesis. Okay, so funguses are not plants. That's how we can't put them in the same box with the plants because they don't do photosynthesis. So that's how they got to be their own kingdom. Okay, they have cell walls like a plant does, but they have to consume their food like an animal does. So that means they have their own box, their own kingdom. Okay, so that they do have the cell walls, and the cell walls act like mini skeletons, just like for the plant, to help the fungus stand upright. And the mushroom, the actual mushroom part of the fungus, is the reproductive structure. Okay, this is where they make their little bitty spores. They don't use seeds, they use spores, which is sort of like a seed that doesn't have a case around it. Okay, so it can dry out really easy, so it's kind of lower on the evolutionary ladder. So, but spore is what they use. The rest of the fungus is underground network of straw-like fibers called hyphae that absorb the food from decaying organisms in the soil. I'm going to tell you some more about how that works in just a second. All right, so if you can see behind my head, this hyphae that I'm talking about, this is this underground stuff. Let me get my pencil running again. Okay, this down here. Okay, this is their root structure. Okay, it's sometimes called a mycelial network, but the individual pieces, the individual sticks are called hyphae. It's sort of like a root system, but different because they're like straws. Okay, so let me pull up the stuff here. So the way that mushrooms eat are just kind of weird. What they do is they almost like spit out digestive juices down this straw. Then the digestive juices are going to rot the log or whatever it is that they're on. And then once it starts to rot, they suck it back up the straw, and that's how they get the nutrients. So they spit out digestive chemicals, or they release digestive chemicals out down through those straws. The straws are called hyphae, out through those straws that are in their sort of roots. And they throw out digestive chemicals. And then they break down those, the rot or whatever it is that they're on. And then once it's rotted, they bring it back up to get the nutrients out of it. All right, so they get their food by releasing digestive chemicals. Yes, we are at school now. Okay, so, and that helps to break down the organic matter. And then they absorb back up the nutrients through their straw-like hyphae. So it's like slurping it. Okay, and so the bodies of most of the fungi are these huge networks of threads. I mean, some of the largest, these networks of hyphae, and mycelium is the other word for the roots when you think of the whole thing. Okay, the individual sticks are hyphae. The whole thing is called mycelium. So the mycelial network can be huge. I mean, talking bigger than a football field, and you only see the one little mushroom. You only see the one little mushroom. That's where they make their spores. But the whole thing can be as big as a football field. Okay, so the bodies of most of the fungi are huge networks of this thread stuff, mycelial network, that grows down through the soil and into dead wood and other things that they're trying to feed off of. Like the bacteria, the fungus is going to play a good, important role in breaking down the bodies of dead stuff. Okay, so that's how, you know that they start to break down and rot stuff so that the bodies don't just pile up everywhere. And so funguses, some of them are going to cause disease. Like, that's just gross. Okay, athlete's foot. Okay, we've heard of it. Okay, athlete's foot is an example of a disease caused by funguses, and they do a lot of skin diseases. But most of the time, a lot of times, funguses are good for flavoring in the food, like blue cheese. Okay, and whatever this salami, this meat here is, that's a fungus that helps it taste real good. Okay, the fungus gives the cheese its blue color and its flavor. Yeast is a fungus that makes bread rise. Okay, it says produces the gas that makes bread rise. You know that when you break down your food, the reason we breathe out carbon dioxide is because we've been breaking down our food. Okay, the carbon dioxide comes from the breaking down of glucose molecules. Okay, that's where the carbon dioxide comes from that we breathe out. Yeasts are doing the same thing. They are breaking down the glucose in the bread dough and putting out carbon dioxide. Well, when they put out carbon dioxide, it makes the bread rise. All right, so yeast is a fungus that causes bread to rise for us. Here's our table again. So we know archa means the old bacteria, the extremophiles. Okay, Eubacteria, these are the true bacteria that are common and everywhere. Neither one of these guys has a nucleus. Okay, we just did fungus. Okay, they have a nucleus, but they have to eat their food. Okay, so they're going to absorb their food through the body structures, okay, called the hyphae, the straw things. They do have cell walls like plant do. Most of them live on land, okay, and they do have to consume their food, okay. So yeasts and mushrooms, mold and mildew, and rusts, not like the rust on metal, okay, that's a whole different thing. Okay, this is a different kind of rust. Okay, now we're going to the protists. Okay, that's the next category. Remember, everything from here on out has a nucleus, so that's the first step. So all of these guys have a nucleus. So let's learn about the protists. All right, they are basically, does everybody have a junk drawer in their kitchen where you just sometimes there's recipes, sometimes there's flyers from restaurants, sometimes it's a pair of scissors, sometimes it's old batteries, sometimes it's those big fat straws. You just drop it in this this drawer in your kitchen, right? Almost everybody has a junk drawer in the kitchen, or is that just me? Okay. Well, the protists are a junk drawer. Pretty much. The Protist kingdom is a junk drawer. Some of them do photosynthesis, some of them are consumers, some of them are single-celled, some of them are multi-celled. Some of them have cell walls, some of them don't. Some of them move around, some of them don't. Some of them, it's like a big junk drawer full of stuff. All right, that's the Protists. Okay, they're big, big. So we say, if we want to be polite, we say it's a diverse kingdom. It's a junk drawer. It's just a junk drawer. Okay, so the protists are a very diverse kingdom. Okay, some, like the amoebas, are animal-like. And what I mean by animal-like, they don't have a cell wall and they have to eat. Others are plant-like, like the kelp. So plant-like means they do have a cell wall and they can do photosynthesis. All right, and some of them look like fungus. So they're not close enough. Just a second. That's Miss Thomas. I'm going to pause this. Oh. Yeah. Okay, that was an important announcement that we needed to hear. Let me see where we were. Okay, so the protist is a junk drawer. Now, we have some that look like animals, like this amoeba, but they're not close enough to put them in the animal drawer, the animal box. Some that are plant-like, but not close enough to put them in the plant box. Some that are fungus-like, but not close enough to put them in the fungus kingdom. So this is why I'm calling it a junk drawer. They're close, but not enough to get counted in the kingdom. So we just put them in the junk drawer. Most of them are single-celled and microscopic. Okay, they're little things that float in the ocean, or float in the tops of ponds and stuff like that. Another one, some of them, this particular one, Plasmodium, is the one that causes malaria. So some of these are really, really dangerous. Some of them, like this here, this is a protist. Looks like a plant to me too. I'm just saying. It looks like a plant, but it is not. It is just a protist. This is kelp, giant kelp. Okay, so some of these protists can be multicellular. Okay, or not quite multicellular, but a whole bunch of cells living in a colony together. Okay, so it's not quite multicellular. It's crazy. So this is why we call the protist a junk drawer. Okay, this is that Plasmodium that I was talking about. Okay, he lives in this mosquito. And this mosquito comes and bites somebody, and now all of a sudden they have this Anopheles. That's the name of the mosquito. And now you've got malaria. Okay, so then you can transfer between humans or blood transfer, unsterile needles, and from mamas to babies across the placenta. Oh, hold on. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is a protist, okay, called Plasmodium that lives in this mosquito and causes malaria. So they're complicated. They're a little bit more complicated than bacterias are. That's why they're not in the bacteria pile. Plus, they also have nucleus, right? These guys have a nucleus. That's why they're not with the bacteria. But they are microscopic, a lot of them. Let's see what else we have about our protist. The most important kind of protist is algae. Okay, algae, like I said, this is the giant kelp. This is a protist. Okay, these are also protists. Now this makes sense. All right, when I'm looking at these guys, okay, I can picture these guys as protists because they're microscopic, single-celled little things. But these are also protists. I mean, full, solid, really, really, really looking like a plant, but it's not a plant. It's a protist. Okay, and that's algae. Algae is a plant-like protist that makes their own food using energy from the sun. What does that mean? That means they do photosynthesis, okay? But they range in size from that giant kelp down to a lot of the algae are single-celled, okay? But we also have the giant kelp, so that algae is also a very diverse group. The little single-celled are the phytoplankton, and those are the ones that start all the food webs in the ocean, okay? All right, protist. All right, so Archaebacteria, old bacteria from the harsh environments. Eubacteria, true bacteria that are common and everywhere. Okay, now everybody else has a nucleus. Fungi has a nucleus. It's different. It has cell walls like a plant does, but it has to eat its food like an animal does. These are our yeasts and mushrooms. We just did protist. This is a junk drawer protist. Most of them are single-celled, but some have many cells. Most of them live in the water, okay? And these are some of the examples of those, okay? All right, now we're headed over to the plant category. Let's go to the plant category. All right, so with our plants, the reason we couldn't put the protist in the plant box, like I said, some of the protists are plant-like, right? The reason we can't put them in the plant box is that every single plant is multicellular. There aren't any single-celled plants. So we couldn't put the protists in there. Even if some of those protists were plant-like, we can't put them in the plant box. Plant box, all the plants are multicellular. And we know that every one of them is going to do photosynthesis, and every one of them has cell walls for support. Okay, so that's what lets us put which trading cards go in the plant box. It has to be multicellular, it has to do photosynthesis, and it has to have cell wall. If it has those three things, we can put that trading card into the plant kingdom. But that's still a big kingdom. All right. So the plants most of them live on land so that they can get their sunlight and oxygen for the photosynthesis. And they're going to pull water and nutrients from the roots. And then the leaves and roots are connected, this is a new thing for you, by vascular tissue. All right. They are connected by vascular tissue, which is basically a fancy word to say tubes. All right. Vascular tissue is a fancy way to say tubes. When you're talking about your blood vessels and veins in your body, we call that your vascular system in your body. It's another fancy way to say tubes. Okay, so the leaves and roots are connected by vascular tissue, which means they are connected by tubes, which can the cell walls make it able to bring the water up from the roots and glucose down for storage. So it's a system of tubes that carry water and food back and forth. Vascular tissue. Now that's going to be important because when we're talking about, we just said that what was the things that allowed us to put our trading cards in the plant box? That it was multicellular, that it did photosynthesis, and that it had cell walls. But then I just said that's still a big box. So the next thing, once we have our plant box, we're going to divide it further, because it's still really crowded in that plant box. So the next thing we're going to do is decide, do they have vascular tissue or don't they? Do they have tubes to carry material up from the ground upwards? Because that means they can get tall, like trees and plants. If they don't have tubes, they're going to have to stay down here on the ground and just suck up water from where they are. These are the mosses. Okay, so the first thing when we look at our plant box, we've got all of these trading cards in our plant box. The first thing we're going to do is decide whether or not they have tubes. All right, let's see if that's the next slide. I think it might be. Yeah, see, look. All right, so all of these guys have tubes. What's a fancy word for tubes? Vascular tissue. Okay, these guys don't. So that's the first thing we do. We take all the plants in the box and decide whether or not they have vascular tissue or not. If they don't have vascular tissue, we're going to stick them here with these mosses and liverworts. And then we're going to divide these other guys further. All right, so the lower plants. These are the ones that don't have vascular tissue. Let's see. All right, so and they have no vascular tissue, and they reproduce with spores. Do you remember I talked about spores when we were talking about the mushrooms? They're a tiny, not quite a seed. It's like a seed without a case. All right, and because it's a seed without a case, they can dry out very badly. All right, so it's like I said, it's lesser on the evolutionary ladder. Okay, so they have to live in damp places, and they can't grow very large. Okay, these are these guys up here. Because they don't have vascular tissue, they don't have a way to suck water up very high, so they have to stay low on the ground. Their spores can dry out really easily, so they have to stay wet. All right. Now, these are our mosses. Now, ferns and club mosses. Now, I know this looks exactly as club moss, and moss is not the same thing. Do you see this right here? This is a club moss. See how it has kind of sticks going on? So you can tell because it has sticks, it has vascular tissue, right? Those are the tubes. So ferns and club mosses, they have this tubing. They have vascular tissue. All right. They were the very first of the vascular plants when the earth was first forming. At first we only had mosses. Okay, they have to live low to the ground. And then later on, evolutionarily, as the earth advanced some, now all of a sudden the plants do have vascular tissue and they can get taller and they can move further away from the water because now they can suck water up through the bottoms of their vascular tissue, right? So now they can get taller and they can move further away from the water, but they still have spores. The spores dry out really quickly, so they can't get that far from the water. Now, so later on, we move up to the gymnosperms. These are our pine cones, our pine trees. All right, they have seeds. Okay, so now they're spores. They don't use spores. They have true seeds. The seeds have a coating around them to keep them from drying out, but they don't have fruit around them. Think about apples. Okay, you got the seed and then you got the fruit around it. Gymnosperms don't have that. Okay, they've got the seed and the seed has a covering to keep it from drying out, but it doesn't have fruit around it. So the gymnosperms, these are our vascular, so they do have the vascular system. They are seed plants, they do have seeds. And the pine cones, you have actually male and female pine cones. All right, and this is where most of our lumber and paper comes from. So gymnosperms are our pine trees. Gym sounds sort of like a man's name, right? You can pretend. All right. Gymnosperms, these are the pine cones. We're going to get to angiosperms. Those are the flowering plants. And Angie sounds sort of like a girl's name, right? That'll help. Gymnosperms, pine trees. Angiosperms, flowering plants. Jim and Angie, can you deal with that? I know it's what do you call it when you're assigning people genders and you don't really want to assign people genders. I know it's not a great idea for everybody, but for what we can think about right now, it'll help us remember. Gymnosperms, those are the guys, that's the pine cones. Angiosperms, that's the flowering plants. So this is the gymnosperms, where most of our lumber and paper comes from. They have a lot of adaptations that help them live in drier conditions, so that now we don't have to live near the water anymore. Think of evolutionary, moving further and further from the primordial ooze where the world first started. All right, so the gymnosperms have several adaptations that let them live in drier conditions. They produce pollen, okay, which is actually the male part. Okay, that's the sperm. And so when the pollen, it's coming up springtime, right? So when the pollen comes around, that's actually sperm from plants. Sorry, that's exactly what it is. All right, so the pollen can blow through, and then once they land on the cones, okay, you can produce the seeds, which will develop the embryo plants from dying out. So now, because the spores can dry out easily, now that we have seeds, they have a casing to prevent the baby plant from drying out. And the conifers' needle-like leaves also, water almost can't escape out of here, so they don't lose too much water, and therefore they can live in drier places. Then think about the mosses and the ferns. They have to live in very, very wet places. Well, with the gymnosperms, now all of a sudden plants can live in drier and drier places. There's angiosperms. These are the flowering plants. Is there one more click? Yep. All right, so the angiosperms are the flowering plants that produce seeds within fruit. Okay, and almost all of the land plants nowadays are angiosperms. We do have a lot of gymnosperms, but angiosperms have almost completely replaced them evolutionarily. So the flower is the reproductive structure. Okay, some of the angiosperms, grass is an angiosperm. You wouldn't think there was fruit there, but it is. They have tiny flowers and the wind disperses their pollen. Other ones have really large flowers to attract insects and birds. Okay, so some of the angiosperms let the wind blow their pollen around, and other angiosperms have big flowers to pull the insects and birds to them. So if you're using wind, you don't need a fancy flower. The wind doesn't care what you look like. So if you're using wind to disperse your pollen, you just need small seeds, and you don't have to put a lot of effort. But if you need insects and birds to transfer your pollen, you've got to give them something to come for, right? Insects and birds need to have that nectar, so you need to put the effort in to make it a flower to draw them to you if you want the birds and the insects to spread your pollen for you. So many of the flowering plants depend on the animals to disperse their seeds and carry their pollen. And then once they've carried the pollen to the plant, transfer the pollen from one plant to the other, then they'll make a fruit. Okay, and then you can have the fruit to drop the new set of seeds. So most of the land plants we have are dependent on flowering. Most of the land animals are dependent on flowering plants for their food. So a lot of the food that we eat, wheat, rice, beans, oranges, and lettuce, comes from flowering plants. Even lettuce comes from a flowering plant. Okay, so, and a lot of the building materials and fibers we use, like oak and cotton, those are flowering plants. Now, when we're talking about plants and the mycelial network, think about, remember we talked about the giant mycelial network on the bottom of funguses? Okay, and think about forests. What we have just actually recently realized within the last couple of years is that trees can communicate with one another using the fungus beneath them in the soil. So it's a symbiotic relationship between funguses and plants. The funguses have that giant mycelial network. Remember, I told you they can be as big as a football field. And the trees can tap into the fungus network and actually send information to other trees in the forest. Other trees of their same type, but also trees that are not even related to them. Okay, the trees can actually communicate their needs and send each other nutrients via a network of connected fungi mycelium, that's the root parts of the fungus, buried in the soil. In other words, they can actually talk to one another. Okay, the trees are going to use a network of soil. They don't talk like we talk, but they can send messages. A soil fungus to communicate their needs and to aid neighboring plants. Okay, so further research has shown that these mycorrhizal networks, now mycorrhizal is a combined word. Myco comes from the fungus. Rhizome is a fancy word for the plant roots. So the mycorrhizal network is a combined word. The myco part is talking about the fungus, and the rhizal part is talking about the plants, because this is a symbiosis between plants and funguses. So we call it the mycorrhizal network. It helps trees to send a warning signals about the environmental change and to search for kin related trees, and they can transfer nutrients if they know that they're about to die. The big trees, when they know that they're about to die, can send their nutrients out to the other trees in the forest. There are what they call hub trees, like big mother trees, that can take care of some of the smaller ones, and they can send messages back and forth. All right, so with these mycorrhizal networks, okay, here's the funguses with their roots coming down, because it's the fungus that's I guess carrying the messages back and forth. Okay, the trees are sending the messages. The funguses help to deliver them. Okay, so here's the fungus here, and so they can send messages, like the nutrients can move back and forth. If say there's some disease that's starting to eat this birch tree, they can send out messages, and these guys can set up protection for themselves. This is a mother tree. She can send nutrients to her baby tree. All right, so it's not talking like we do, but there is a lot of good information. And these two links here, how trees secretly talk to each other and the wood wide web, are really, really amazing. I'm going to go ahead and play one of them. See if I can. I think I can. I might not can, but we will in class. All right, but these are amazing. When you get to do yours, I would like you to watch these two videos, okay, as you do your notes, because it's just amazing, and it's cutting edge science. This is some of the newest stuff that we are just finding out. And the simple fact that the trees have been evolving on Earth a lot longer than humans are, it's just understandable that they would be really good at it. It's just amazing what we're finding out. So let's see, here we go to our table again. Archaebacteria, this is old bacteria that live in the harsh environments. The Eubacteria, these are the true bacteria that are common everywhere. Here's a fungus. They have to eat their food like animals do, but they do have cell walls, okay, yeasts and mushrooms. The Protists, this is a junk drawer, okay, a lot of them single-celled, but not all. Most of them live on water. We have some that do photosynthesis and some that don't. Here we go. Now here's our plants. Every single plant is multicellular. Okay, they all have to do their own food by photosynthesis, and they all have cell walls. But then we further divide them into the mosses that do not have vascular tissue and everybody else that does. And then we talked about the individuals. Okay, and then we talked about that the ferns reproduce, both the mosses and ferns reproduce by spores, and everybody else reproduces by seeds. And then the gymnosperms, which are the pine trees, they have cones, and the flowering trees and grasses have flowers. Now let's go to the animals. This will be a lot more familiar, I think. All right, within the animals, we know that the animals don't have cell walls, and they have to make their own, they cannot make their own food. That's how we put them um, into the animal box. Okay, what makes them an animal is that um, they have no cell wall, they cannot make their own food, and at some point in their life they are mobile, because plants don't move around much, right? They can't just get, unless you're in the movies, they can't get up and walk around. But the animals at some point in their life are mobile. So that's what helps us put them into the plant box. Now, some of the animals like insects and spiders have a hard exoskeleton. You know exo means outside, right? Their skeleton is on the outside. That's why bugs go crunch when you step on them. That's their skeleton on the outside. Others like the mammal, fish, reptiles, amphibians, and birds, we all have an interior skeleton. And as a result of both of these, the animals are much more mobile than the plants. And every single animal moves around in their environment at some point of their life. Some of them, like, I think that's on the next slide, hang on. Okay, so the first type of animal we're going to talk about are called the invertebrates. Okay, the invertebrates do not have a backbone. Okay, have you heard of your spine being called a vertebral column or a vertebrate? Or have you heard of, well, anyway, we're talking about your spine. Okay, the spine is also called a vertebral column. And so invertebrates do not have a spine. Okay, they have no backbone. All right, and so they're squishy. And so a lot of these invertebrates you have two choices. Either they have to live in water. If you don't have a backbone, you basically don't have bones, right? So if you don't have a backbone, you need to live in water so that the water can support you. Or you can grow, if you don't have a backbone, you don't have bones on the inside, you grow bones on the outside. That's that exoskeleton we were just talking about for bugs. So the invertebrates don't actually have bones on the inside of them. Okay, so they don't have backbones. And many of the invertebrates live attached to hard surfaces on the ocean and filter food out. See these corals? They live attached to the surface. And various worms and mollusks and like the barnacles that get on the bottom of boats and stuff, they only move around. We said that one of the rules to be an animal is that you have to move around at some time in your life. Well, think about barnacle and coral. They don't really move, but they do when they are larvae, when they are first fertilized and they become eggs and embryos. Okay, they float around at that point. And at this point, they're part of the ocean's plankton. Okay, that's when they're movable. Some more of the invertebrates, like squid and octopus and the insects on land, those are free to move all the time. Okay, some of the invertebrates can move around plenty. There are more insects on Earth than in any other type of animal. So insects are an invertebrate. Remember, they have that waterproof exoskeleton. Every invertebrate, what makes them an invertebrate is they don't have bones. Okay, so the insects get around that by having an exoskeleton. They have a skeleton on the outside of them. So it's a waterproof exoskeleton. It lets them move and reproduce quickly. Think about how fast bugs reproduce. Okay, and most of the insects can fly. Now then we're talking specifically insects right now. And their small size of the insects allows them to live on little tiny bits of food and hide from their enemies in small places. I think I have a graph on the next slide. Yes, okay, there'll be words here in just a second, but you see my face is in the way, but these are all the animals on the, is it all the animals? This is every organism. Viruses and bacteria are also in here. Where it says chordates, that's us, okay, the animals that have backbones, okay, plants, and mollusks and crustaceans, these are other invertebrates, fungi. This is every organism on the earth, this graph, and this many of them are insects. Okay, that's crazy. That's crazy, a lot of insects. Many insects have evolved together and depend on each other. There's 5. So insects and plants. Remember we talked about how important it was for plants to have their pollinators. And we talked in last section about coevolution. Do you remember learning about coevolution, where the plants and their pollinators evolve together? So the insects are going to carry pollen from the male fruit parts to fertilize a plant's egg, which develops into the fruit, okay, and like tomatoes and cucumbers and apples. And the insects are also valuable because they eat other insects that we consider pests. If you ever see a ladybug in your garden, let her stay. She eats things that will kill your plants. Okay, don't ever kill a ladybug. They are great to help take care of other pests. All right, so humans and insects, though, are often enemies. I mean, I think it's a mosquito or a bed bug. I don't know what that is, but it's horrible. Okay, so you got malaria, sleeping sickness, West Nile virus. So for the most part, we don't really like the bugs, but there are good bugs. Don't assume that every single bug is bad. Okay, and so yeah, there are a lot of bad bugs, but don't assume every bug is bad. Now, let's move on to the animals that do have bones. They do have a backbone. These are our vertebrates, okay? And this is where we fall in, okay? The vertebrates are the animals that have a backbone, and that includes mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish. There are 5. 5 groups of animals that they're called classes by this time. 5 classes of vertebrates, okay? Fish, amphibian, birds, reptiles, and mammals. All right, so the first vertebrates on Earth were fish. When the Earth was first forming, the very first animals to have bones at all were the fish. Okay, but now most of the vertebrates live on land. The first land vertebrates, the first ones to come up out of the water, were the reptiles. Okay, the amphibians have to stay in and out. Okay, so as you're moving up, think about when the Earth was first forming. You have the fish. They were the very first ones to, I've got a thing that I'm going to show you. The fish were the very first ones to invent bones, but their eggs, to make babies, the male just drops his stuff in the water and the female drops her stuff in the water, and if they meet together, then you can have a new embryo. Not very efficient. Okay, it's not a great plan, but he drops his stuff in the water, she drops her stuff in the water, and if they meet, you can have a baby. The pieces will join together and create a new embryo. Amphibians had a better job than that. They have to stay near the water, okay, but their eggs, they are fertilized ahead of time. The male and the female actually spend some time together, okay, to make these eggs, but the eggs are still jelly-like, so the eggs must stay in water. Okay, now moving further, then the reptiles come around. Not only is their skin better, because the amphibians, their skin, has to stay wet, right? So they have to stay near the water. Amphibians are able to move further back from the water. Reptiles. Did I say it wrong? Did I say it wrong? The fish have bones, okay? But their eggs are just fertilized loosely in the water. He drops his, she drops hers. The frogs actually, they spend some time together, but they have to stay near the water, both for the frog's skin, the amphibian, and their eggs must stay near the water. The reptiles are able to move further out from the water, and once you can do that, you can colonize other places on the world and get more food, right? If you don't have to stay near the water, you all of a sudden have a lot more options available. So the reptile skin can hold their water, so they don't lose water, they don't dehydrate through their skin as easily, and their eggs have a almost completely waterproof shell, so that the eggs of the reptiles don't have to stay near the water either, which gives the reptiles more freedom to leave the water. Okay, do you see how the fish are trapped and the amphibians are trapped near the water? The reptiles now can move further out. Now, all these other 3 are cold-blooded. The fish are cold-blooded, the amphibians are cold-blooded, and the reptiles are cold-blooded. By the time you get to birds, they are warm-blooded. And that means, remember, with cold-blooded, whatever temperature the rest of the world is, they are that same temperature. So they have to stay in warmish environments. Birds are warm-blooded, which means they hold their furnaces on the inside of them. That means they can be warm wherever they are. That means all of a sudden now even cold places are open and available to the birds. They have an even better eggshell than the reptiles do. Their eggshell is even more waterproof, so there's no need for them to be in the water at all. So with the addition of the feathers for flight the warm-bloodedness and the even better egg, birds have more available to them. Then you step it up to mammals. Mammals don't even need an egg at all. We don't need to lay an egg. We carry our babies right here with us. If I feel like taking a walk, I take my baby with me, and I know he's safe because he's here in my stomach. So that's one of the things that the mammals set up that was even better than what the birds had set up. They keep the babies inside until they're ready to be hatched, ready to be born. They're also warm-blooded, so they can be anywhere. They have fur instead of feathers, and that also helps them stay warm. Yes, humans have fur too. This counts. All right. All right, so moving up, so as we go up, each one has developed things that allow them to go further and further away from the initial water source, and they have more things available because they can go to more places. Okay, so this is where we started with the reptiles. The reptiles were successful because they had that almost waterproof egg. That means they can hatch on land away from the predators in the water, and they can move further and further away. This is what I was talking about here. So we start off with the fish. Okay, they have scales on the body, gills for breathing, cold-blooded. Then the next step up is the amphibians. Okay, they have the wet skin and the wet eggs, so they have to stay near the water. The reptiles have dry, scaly skin, so they themselves are not going to dry out, and the eggs can be laid on dry land, which allows them to move further and further out. Next step up is the birds. They have even better eggs, and they're warm-blooded now. These guys all, whatever temperature the extra world is, the outside world is, they are that temperature. Birds and mammals, we have our thermostats on the inside of us, so we don't have to stay where it's warm. We will be warm anyway. Okay, so the birds' next step up is an even better egg and warm-blooded. The mammals, no egg at all. We hold this baby inside of us. So if we can take care of ourselves, we can take care of this baby. There's nobody going to, because think about how many different animals will raid a bird's nest. When she goes out to get food, the raccoon comes and steals her egg. That's one thing that the mammals fixed up. Okay, I've got my baby with me. You're not getting to the baby unless you go through me first. So it's an added protection. All right, they feed the babies with milk that the mother produces herself. Think about the birds. They have to actually go get worms for the babies all the time. The mammal mothers produce their milk already, so they don't even have to go hunt for it. You just have to keep the mother fed. So that's another step up that the mammals have, okay, compared to what the birds had. So this is what we're talking about. The warm-blooded allows them to go other places. The harder shelled eggs to help them keep young, while the babies are the mother bird will protect the hard shell eggs and protect the young until they've developed far enough. And the mammals, being warm-blooded, we can go anywhere. We have fur and we feed our young with milk, so we have food for the baby already set up. All right, so the mammals and the birds have the ability to maintain that high body temperature, meaning we are warm-blooded, which allows them to live in cold areas where other animals cannot live. And the simple fact that we can move out to further areas means there'll be less competition for food. All right, so these are the things that make each one different that I just went over with you. Okay, so the fish, cold-blooded, and the amphibians, they have that moist skin, and they have the soft eggs, okay? And so they have to stay near the water. The reptiles, they have the scales made of keratin. That means their skin's going to be dry and not going to dry out like an amphibian would. They have those soft eggs, but they're better waterproof. Okay, they are still cold-blooded. Now the birds, they've invented feathers, and they have those harder eggs. Yes, I know it's easy to crack a bird's egg, but it's up harder compared to what a reptile's eggs was. Think about a baseball that doesn't have any stuffing in it. That's sort of like what a reptile's egg is. Okay, it's like a baseball that doesn't have any stuffing in it. So it's soft, but it's pretty much waterproof. Okay, but then compare that to the bird where you have an actual case that's not going to lose its water. All right, but now the birds are warm-blooded and so are the mammals. See how we get better as we go along?